Welcome to a special edition of the Israel Insider Podcast. Yesterday was a historic day for Israel's past, present, and future. There's a new government and a new prime minister. Ron Cantor, the president of Shalanu TV and Israel regional director for God TV, is here to provide us with an analysis. I'm Lisa Hutchison. Thanks for joining us for this special edition of the podcast. Okay, Ron. So yesterday was historic. Please fill us in from your perspective there in Israel.
Yeah, it was historic and horrific all at the same time. And I hope our listeners will listen to this whole thing because I know I've seen a lot of comments on Facebook and people are confused. Believers are confused as to what happened in Israel yesterday. And one of the reasons is because they are fans of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is just an assumption that he can do no wrong, that he is God's choice for Israel, that this is an attack from the deep state against him, attack from the left wing. I even saw one comment who said they took down Trump and now they're taking down Netanyahu. And I was, well, who is they? Because they in America are not the they in Israel. And I understand why the average evangelical believer is a big fan of Benjamin Netanyahu, and they should be. He has been an amazing leader for, I'm going to say, 8 to 10 out of the last 12 years. Certainly on the world stage, certainly standing up to Iran, standing up to Obama as he was signing the deal with Iran. He's been very bold in terms of Israel's need for security, the world's need to stand against Islamic terrorism. But I'm going to say that if there were term limits in Israel, let's suppose that he could only serve 2 full terms, that would be 8 years, or say 2.5 terms because some of them are broken. And if he had to resign, say, after 8 or 10 years, he would have gone down in history as the greatest Israeli prime minister and one of the great politicians of all time. But there's something to be said about being in power too long that is not good for mere mortals. We get into big trouble, whether it's President Trump, whether it's President Obama, no matter who it is, if we become enamored with a personality. God is bigger than any one individual.
That's right. Yeah.
And so with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he has made several grave mistakes over the past few years. Again, if he had retired as prime minister after 8 years, he would be celebrated in Israel and throughout the world. But he, again, I've shared different things on the podcast. I'll go through them real quickly. Number one is he embraced the far-right racist political party called Jewish Power. This is a group that is completely rejected by mainstream Israel. Even right-wing Israel rejects them because they're racist, and we hate racists. God hates. I don't hate the race. I love everyone. What I mean is we hate racism, and it's demonic because we're all made in the image of God. And the reason he embraced them is not because he is wanting to embrace racism. It's because he wanted their votes. He thought if a certain segment of Israeli society votes for them, I don't want their votes to go for nothing. So I'm going to help these guys get in the Knesset, and then they'll be a part of my coalition. They won't have any power, but there's nothing good. And I believe spiritually he injured himself. It decreased the favor of God on his life by doing that. In addition to that, I can't remember when it was, but he, in one of the previous elections, he warned right before the election that if the Israeli Jews didn't get out and vote, that the Arabs were going to win big. Listen, we are a state that is majority Jewish, but we have an Arab population, 20%. They're not bad people. I mean, there's bad apples there, just like there is in the Jewish segment. God loves all people. That was a misstep. He is under indictment right now. In fact, he is in the midst of a trial for 3 acts of corruption, including bribery at a pretty significant level. There's a very high probability that a year from now he'll be in jail.
Hmm.
Certainly, if he's convicted, they may come out with some deals. My point is this: is that I understand for evangelicals who don't live in Israel, and I see them comment, and I feel your pain. I really do, because you've seen him, in Congress when he spoke against the Iran deal or at the UN, and it's so refreshing to see somebody be bold like that.
Hmm.
But I'm telling you, inside of Israel, he's been a dividing force. And I don't mean a dividing force between left and right, because we don't have a left wing in Israel. That's why it's funny when he says that Naftali Bennett is leading a new left wing government. There is no left wing in Israel. In our Knesset, there's 120 seats. 12 of them, that's 10%, are controlled by moderate left and extreme left. That is 12 out of 120. The major majority of Knesset seats are controlled by center right and center. And Bibi is in a fight not with the left wing. He's actually in a fight with somebody who's to the right of him, Naftali Bennett. So anyways, he has made some mistakes. The people who are talented and smart in the Likud party, most of them have left, like Gidon Sar, like Naftali Bennett, and then before that, Avigdor Lieberman. All these guys lead their own parties. It's very probable that Benny Gantz would have joined Likud if not for Netanyahu being there. That he has pushed down anybody who might be a threat to his power, which is really, if you look at this in terms of ministry, that's not how you build a ministry. As we minister here in Israel, both in our congregation and I'm always praying, God, bring people who are talented, more anointed than me, more gifted than me, that people that can take over for us one day, not people that we would be jealous of or seek to keep from power. And I've seen this in ministry, Lisa, over the years. I've seen pastors push away anybody who might have any a little bit of anointing or gifting or charisma, because they don't want to share the limelight. That is not a servant leader, but that is how Netanyahu has built the Likud over the past 12 years, and he's turned it really into a personality cult. Now, again, I want to be very clear to our listeners. There are just as many right-wing ministers, or a little bit less. The Likud party has 30 seats. There's roughly 21 seats that are either just as right, if not more right, than the Likud, that will not work with Bibi because of past experience. Okay, that brings us up to yesterday. So I said all that to say that I know this is strange and hard and weird for evangelicals who love Benjamin Netanyahu, but men are fallible. They're not perfect. And, some of our greatest heroes in the Bible did not end well or made major missteps in their life. So, and Bibi's not a biblical hero. He's not born again. He and his government did Lisa, it was about 1 year ago now on the Hebrew calendar that he shut down Shalanu TV. Now, when I say he did that, it's those in his government. He certainly could have overridden it. He knew about it. And it was a freedom of, it was really undemocratic. So I'm going to add that to the missteps, although I would say that the greater majority of Israelis would not agree with me on that. But we are flourishing in our digital channel, by the way. Tens of thousands of Israelis are watching Shalanu TV, and it's pretty exciting. That brings us to yesterday. Yesterday was the swearing, or the vote, and then the swearing-in ceremony of the new Mimshala, the new government. And it was a spectacle. It was a spectacle.
Yeah, I mean, I know that passions can run high everywhere, and in Israel, no exception. But I mean, was that as much of a spectacle as it looked like it was from here? I mean, was that very much out of order? Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Put it this way. I don't know his name, but there's a news reporter on Channel 12 who's from his looks, he's in his 70s, and he started his broadcast at 6 p.m. kind of speechless. And he said, I've been doing this since I was young. I've been working in the Knesset as a reporter since I was I've never seen this. Wow. I've never seen anything like it. There's never been a government where the outgoing prime minister wasn't gracious to the incoming prime minister, who, today, this is the next day, there is a transition meeting between the old prime minister, which was Netanyahu, and the new prime minister, Naftali Bennett. Again, Bennett is to the right of Bibi Netanyahu. He by the way, he ended his speech yesterday with a beautiful prayer. He prayed what's called the Shechianu, which is a very famous prayer in Judaism that thanks God for keeping us alive, keeping us as a people to bring us to this moment and point in history that we still exist. So it's one of several times that he's boldly invoked the name of the Lord he prayed when they formed the government before the vote about a week ago. He gave a speech and he said, he prayed the prayer of Solomon, that God would give him wisdom to govern.
Wow.
So again, he's a politician, but he's also a religious guy. I've always liked Naftali Bennett. I am suspect of all politicians, and there's good reason to be that way, but I've always liked him. He seems like a good guy to me. But getting back to yesterday, or rather today, so they have this meeting where they have to have it. It's a transfer of authority meeting, and at the end, you in the Hebrew you say lasot lachaim, to do a lachaim. You raise a glass of wine or champagne, and you make a toast and give a blessing to the incoming prime minister. But Bibi skipped that. In fact, the similarities between the way Netanyahu handled himself and the way President Trump handled himself in defeat are uncanny. I mean, unless he was actually copying President Trump. Last week, Netanyahu said this is the greatest travesty in the history of democracy. And yet, and that it was a fraud and that it was stolen. I mean, you could have just replaced him with President Trump tweeting about the election.
There was a lot of similarities in the verbiage, for sure. A lot of name calling, the same name calling,
at least in President Trump's case, he after the election, he could say that it was a miscount, and nobody's even suggested that the election was March 23rd. No one has even mentioned that there was possible fraud. Not until this new government, over 2.5 months later, came together. Then suddenly, it is a fraud. It's I think Bibi called it a fake government yesterday.
And deep state, all of that, same verbiage.
Yes. Yeah. And the funny thing is that in Israel, the deep state is Bibi's deep state. He's been the prime minister for 12 years. So the idea of the deep state are bureaucrats who were hired. A lot of people who use that term, they don't even know what it means. But it's the idea that people get entrenched in certain positions in government, and they're not replaced, when there's a new government, because that would be a logistical nightmare. And so you have holdovers from, say, 8 years of Obama that become the deep state against Trump. Well, here, there can't be much of a deep state against Bibi, since he's appointed. Like, for instance, he thinks that the attorney general is part of the deep state against him. He appointed the attorney general, so it's his own deep state. So they, so let's go to yesterday. Wow. I kind of reserved the latter part of the day so I could watch it. And here's the interesting thing. I didn't expect it to be the way it was, but I've never watched the swearing in, the voting of any new government. Let's think. Since I lived here, I moved here, Ariel Sharon was prime minister. Then it was Olmert who was, and then Bibi. And then it's been Bibi since then. So that it's just never been a big deal to me. Somehow I knew this was different. I think everyone knew this was different. And the reason it was different, and again, I'm not speaking right now. I'm just going to speak as an Israeli, not as a believer. There is tremendous Bibi fatigue in the country after 12 years. And so certainly the left wing of Israel, again, which is very small, was against him. And then the center kind of began to turn against him. But then the right wing, half of the right wing for the most part, began to turn against him. And so he was left with his own party and the ultra Orthodox group. So over the past year since coronavirus, there's been regular. I remember over the summer there were weekly demonstrations, massive demonstrations against him, and they weren't just attended by people on the left, mostly, but there were people on the right who were saying we need change. We need, it's too long. 12 years it's too 11 years at that point. So I think the reason there was so much anticipation, and here's the funny part. Again, let me just say it again. I'll probably say it a few more times. Naftali Bennett, who is now the prime minister of Israel, is more right-wing than Benjamin Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. And yet last night in Rabin Square, which is that's where you go to protest in Tel Aviv, it was filled with thousands of Israelis, mostly probably left-wing, cheering on Naftali Bennett. Now, that doesn't mean that Naftali Bennett is different. It just means, in terms of, let me rephrase it. It doesn't mean that he's suddenly become left wing. He has not. It means that he's part of what's called the change government. And I'll say this as well, Lisa, that this new government is not about one man. When it's a strange thing. When I look at all the leaders in the government, I've never seen this here in Israel. It's always about the prime minister, just as in the U.S. The position of president of a country is stronger than the position of prime minister in most nations. Mm-hmm. So the U.S. president is much more powerful than the Israeli prime minister. U.S. president, he's going to serve 4 years almost no matter what, outside of really crazy circumstances. And here it could fall apart overnight. Just one vote of no confidence in the. But when I looked at, I don't look at Naftali Bennett so much as the prime minister, but I look at the 5 primary men that came together and made this happen as a team. Mm-hmm. And like Yair Lapid, who got the most votes of anybody in the coalition, 17 seats. He's the foreign minister now and the alternate prime minister if something happened to Bennett. And I don't really, normally I would see the foreign minister as a several notches below, but I think there's a general feeling in the country that they're kind of almost equal. And that they are seeking to prefer each other. Now, will that continue? I don't know. But they are, they're focused on if you look at their agenda, it's very pragmatic. They want to pass a budget. They want to get, the Orthodox, they're passing, implementing a law that's already been passed that the Orthodox will have to go in the army, that they will stop getting massive entitlements. So let me just share this. I'm still trying to get to what happened yesterday, so don't turn the dial. But Bibi has relied on the 15, 16 or so seats or votes that make up the ultra-Orthodox. 2 parties, one is the Sephardic and one is the Ashkenazi, which is one are Jews that come from Arab countries, one are Jews that come from Eastern Europe, Ashkenazi and Sephardic. And so one is called United Torah Judaism, the other is called Shas. Now, they're not really political. They just want stuff. They basically will do whatever Bibi wants them to do if they get their stuff. Don't make us serve in the army. Don't make our men get jobs. Let us study all day and you support us. And one of we had this great disaster a few weeks ago in Mount Meron where was it 45 people died, were trampled to death. I can't recall how many, but I think it was 45.
Right, I think so. And almost 200 were injured. Mm-hmm.
And 200 were injured. And the Orthodox are blocking an investigation to find out how such a thing could happen. So they live in their own world. And when there's a fellow by the name of Yaakov Litzman, who he had to turn over his ministry today to the incoming minister. I can't remember which ministry he was over. He used to be our health minister, and they had to remove him in the middle of Corona because he kept breaking his own coronavirus ordinances. He was breaking them, and then he ended up getting Corona. Now, if you take a look at him, he does not look like a healthy man, but he's under indictment himself because he covered. Now, again, these people view themselves as the holy among us. And they would look at Tel Aviv as Sodom and Gomorrah, and they're holy. But let me tell you something. You know what he's under indictment for? Because he shielded a pedophile woman from Australia, a ultra-Orthodox woman who has been accused of extreme pedophilia in Australia. She fled to Israel, and he shielded her from prosecution.
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
finally, I believe she's been extradited back to Australia finally, but it was in Hebrew would say a busha, an embarrassment, a shame. And now he's finally under indictment. This is a guy who is the leader of one of our two ultra-Orthodox groups. So they have caused tremendous trouble in our nation, these two political groups. One of the reasons Israelis are so happy today is they're finally out of the government. And if this government can last for 5 years, there's a lot of good they can do. It's not about left wing, right wing. It's about that you had this group right here that was blackmailing the government to get free stuff in exchange for their votes. Or maybe there's another word I won't use for that when you sell yourself for stuff. Anyways, and again, these are religious people, supposedly. Yesterday, the day began. I was sat down and watched it on TV, and it began with Naftali Bennett being introduced, and he's going to give a speech of about 20, 30 minutes. I've read the speech. It's a really good speech. It's a very bold agenda. It's an agenda that any Israeli should be excited about. And they just the opposition just shouted him down in the worst way, name calling him a traitor, calling him a murderer. I mean, just holding up signs, and
Wow.
it was so embarrassing. It reminded me. Somebody brought this up to me today. It said it reminded them of the first debate between Trump and Biden in terms of where they both lost control. And so many people the next day after that debate just felt dirty. It just felt like, oh, did that really happen? That's kind of how a lot of Israelis felt. Like, is that really happening in my country? What has happened? As one of the key vote that made this work was, his name, because you've shared it with me, with the
Orbach.
Orbach, thank you, Nir Orbach. Lots of names. When he came out and said that he was going to vote with the government, he said the far right. He said, "I don't recognize them anymore."
That's right.
He said, "I'm a right wing minister. I believe the land of Israel, and we got to develop it, and I believe in settlements, which are cities in the West Bank. I do too." He said, "But these people." Referring to Itamar Ben Gavir, who I see as a racist, and some others. He said, I don't know them. That's not what I stand for. And he said, this government is needed in Israel. Again, this is a guy who's on the far right. So when Netanyahu gets up and says this is a far left takeover, that's just politics. It's actually for foreign consumption, because nobody in Israel believes it. Nobody in Israel.
Also, I think also it's all about the words. And when you say that about it's for the folks in the West, in America, because again, when we hear left wing and right wing, we have a whole other paradigm about what we are hearing when those words come up. And that's not what it is in Israel. In Israel, again, just to say it one more time, left wing and right wing have to do with national security. And that's really the heart of it. And,
and the economy.
And the economy, and how they view the things that will further the economy. And so, but with that, and that's not what it is here in America. And so just for
on
us
the moral
to remember
issues that Americans are concerned about, sadly, there's no argument. Abortion is legal. There's nobody fighting other than Messianic believers. We have a movement called Ba'ad Chaim, which means pro-life, and we have crisis pregnancy centers, and we, dear friend of mine, Sandy Shoshani, leads that, and they've helped so many women who wanted to have their babies or were confused. but there is no viable pro-life movement, seeking to
Mm.
overturn those laws. Homosexuality, there's, the only reason we don't have homosexual marriage, interestingly enough, is because the rabbis control who can marry who.
Mm.
But you say, oh, that's great. Well, here's the other side. If you're Jewish and you want to marry a non-Jew, or even if you want to marry somebody who's got a Jewish father but not a Jewish mother, you have to go to another country and get married.
Mm.
They will
Wow.
not marry you unless you go under
Wow.
formal conversion. But I digress.
Yeah.
Let's go
We'll go
back to
back to,
yesterday.
yeah,
So here's
yesterday's
Bennett.
event.
He's trying to give this speech. I would encourage people to go read it. It's available online. You won't understand him, not only because it's in Hebrew, but because they shouted him down. One of the nice moments in the middle of his speech is the camera went to his children who were sitting in the gallery, in the balcony, and
Mhm.
all three of them were making the heart sign as their father is being called all kinds of names,
Aw.
and he has just about to become prime minister of Israel. They're saying, Dad, we love you, we're with you. And he said, I told my kids a few weeks ago, your dad is about to become the most hated man in Israel.
Wow.
So hang in there.
Wow. Wow.
So he gets, so now here's the funny part. Fortunately, there's a
Mhm.
little bit of humor in all this. Yariv Levin is the Speaker of the Knesset. He's actually part of Likud, but he did a great job trying to keep order. That's his job. And so as people are yelling, he's saying, enough, stop, don't do that. And then he would call them out by name, like, Chaver Knesset, which means Knesset member, Cohen, which is our Schwartz, or rather, which is our Schwartz is our
Smith.
Cohen, which is our Smith. Thank you. Schwartz is our Smith. Cohen's our Smith. That's your first warning. And if you get to 3 warnings, and I learned all this yesterday, just watching it on TV, then the security guys would come and remove you. So you had, security guys just going in and out, removing people. And he would say, Chaver Knesset Cohen, that's your second warning. Chaver Knesset Schwartz, that's your first warning. And then it's your third warning. And then they come in and take you. And I honestly, how he kept track of how many people, because it was pandemonium. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a genius. But then there was one guy, I've never seen him before, but he apparently used up all of his chances, and he said, that's your Pam Shlishit, that's your third time, you're out of here. And so he didn't hear that he said it's your third time. So he's talking to the guy next to him when the security guys come and tap him on the shoulder, and he says, no, that's my second time. I got one more chance. And they said, no, it's your third. He's like, really? My third? I thought it was. It was so comical in the midst of this crazy thing. And then they came. And then after Bennett's, go ahead.
Sorry, that just reminds me. I taught. I was a substitute teacher for a little while, and I taught the pre-kindergarten kids, and it totally reminds me of that, giving them their warnings and then move on. That's just
Except
pitiful,
pre-kindergarten kids are a little bit more mature.
Yeah, that's pitiful for adults. Okay, sorry, go ahead. So after this fella gets his 3 warnings and he's out.
Then when Bibi, as the outgoing prime minister, he gets to give a speech as well. All these guys come back in, like they think, okay, we can. And then and Levine, the Speaker of the Knesset, is get these guys out of here. Once you're removed, you can't come in just because you like who's speaking now. So it was crazy. Now, Yair Lapid, I think he demonstrated the most humility of anyone in the Knesset yesterday. So again, just to remind our listeners, Yair Lapid is what I would call a Renaissance man. He's a writer. He's wrote TV scripts. He's written books. The book that he wrote a book about his father. He wrote an autobiography in his father's voice about his dad. Wow. I'm tearing up right now just remembering reading that book. It was one of the best books I've ever read in my life. He took all the history of his dad. His dad was an amazing Israeli, Joseph Tommy Lapid. He was a justice minister. He was part of a political party called Shinui back right when I moved here. And he did so many other things. An Holocaust survivor from Hungary in Yugoslavia. Phenomenal book. I can't remember the name. In My Father's Voice, something like that. Or Memories of My Father, something. It was just amazing. And a big, thick, like 700-page book. I couldn't put it down. My daughter bought it for me, and I just loved it. He's a brilliant guy. He was a TV personality, a interviewer at an interview show like Oprah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then he became his roots are in journalism. He became the top, uh, uh, I guess you would say, news host on what we call the Sunday morning news shows in America. Here they're on Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
And his show, the 8 p.m. Friday Night News, is probably the most watched news show. And he hosted, that was his show for several years. And then he went into politics and started a party called There Is a Future, Yesh Atid. And he really is run on a platform of bringing integrity back into the government and smaller government. And so when it was his turn, he's the one now. So now that you know that, he is the one that formed this government. Now, there's never been a time in the history of Israel where the politician forming the government was not the prime minister.
Mm-hmm.
He's the foreign minister. Now, after 2.5 years, he'll become the prime minister, but that took a lot of humility on his part to now again, the thing that united them all was that they needed to move beyond Bibi. And not just move beyond Bibi. They didn't want to go through a fifth election. We don't have a budget. We haven't had a government for 2 years. We've been in a limbo government. Let me rephrase that. We did have the Gantz Bibi government, and that lasted for 6 months before it fell apart. So Lapid, it's his turn to speak. He formed the government. Give him 20, 30 minutes. And he wrote, I'm sure, I was actually looking forward to it because he is a wordsmith, and I knew he would deliver an eloquent speech. He got up there, and I'm going to read it to you. Let me just go find it. I have it right here. So he got up, and instead of giving a 20, 30-minute speech, he gave a less than 1 minute speech. And here's what he said. He said, my mother's 86 years old, and we don't ask her to come to Jerusalem lightly. But we did it because I assumed you would be able to get over yourselves and behave with statesmanship at this moment. And she would see a smooth transition of government. When she was born, there was no state of Israel. Tel Aviv was a small town of 30,000 people, and we didn't have a parliament. I wanted her to be proud of the democratic process in Israel. Instead, she, along with every, I'm so upset over what I saw yesterday that it's hard to read this without just tearing up. He said, instead, she, along with every citizen of Israel, is ashamed of you and remembers clearly why it's time to replace you. And that's a sentiment I agree with. They behaved like, I don't even want to say children, spoiled children who were so angry that they were losing power. Like it wasn't fair. It's not fair. No, this is how our democracy works. Now, you might be wondering, Ron, are you alone here? What do other believers think? I can't tell you what every other believer thinks. I can only tell you what every believer I have talked to and every believer I have seen post something on social media in Israel, every single one of them is for this change government. I have not seen one person post anything in support of Benjamin Netanyahu. Not even people I know who are lifelong Likudniks, followers of Likud, supporters of Likud. Again, I think this government was the grace of God, the mercy of God. And again, I shared with you, Lisa, and with our listeners, back in September, August, the Lord spoke to me and said that he was moving on from Bibi Netanyahu because he had begun to put his family and his own interest ahead of those of the nation. And that is how he acted, like a king, like this was his own, that Israel was his own startup that he was the CEO of. And when Bennett ran, he said, if a CEO isn't doing a good job, you replace him. And that's what's happened. Bibi then got up and gave his speech, and it was horrible. It was bitter. It just wasn't nice at all. Nothing congratulatory, nothing gracious whatsoever. Just they're going to fail. They're going to fail quickly. We'll be back in power very soon. It was the worst I've seen since I've been in Israel, 20 years almost.
Wow.
And even if you think you're going to be back, there's a time to say that. Like today, you can say it today, which he already has.
Yeah.
But not,
he doesn't appear to be going quietly. He is gonna.
No,
he seems to be vowing to make it very hard in the opposition.
Yeah, but there's, honestly, the opposition has no power. Just like he had pretty much full reign while he was, the only people that have power are the people in your coalition. The other Knesset members, the only thing they really do is vote. So if new laws are coming into, up to be voted upon, every Knesset member is going to vote. Whether they're in the government or outside of the government, they're still a Knesset member. But the ruling coalition has all the power, in terms but again, they still have to pass things through the whole Knesset. Doesn't mean that they're going to agree on everything. So just because, and that's the thing, just because Bennett wants to do X doesn't mean the rest of the government's going to want to do it. So you've got, and as he said, it's not a dream government. He said, we're going to get done what we can get done, what we can agree on to help the people of Israel. It's not a right-wing government, but it is more right-wing than it is left-wing by far.
Well, Ron, how can people best pray for Israel and support Israel now with this new change?
Yeah. Just pray. Honestly, at the end of the day, politics are politics. We need revival. I was taking a walk this morning, and I posted a little thing on the Israel Insider page on Facebook. I was walking and praying this morning, and just experiencing the Spirit of God and His burden for this country. Yair Lapid, Naftali Bennett, I believe they're good for the country, but we need revival. We need people to be born again. We need God to open up the eyes of this nation to the fact that Yeshua is the Messiah. That's the great need. Not right wing, left wing, not religious parties, anti-religious parties. We need God to move in this country. We need God to breathe on this country. And sometimes I'll just walk outside and I just cry. I'm just so burdened for this nation, and I don't know how God's going to do it. We see people come into the kingdom little by little. I mean, we're growing. The body of believers is growing. But we're not seeing Kol Yisrael Yivasha, all Israel is saved, Romans 11:26. That's what I'm asking people to pray for. Certainly, the Bible tells us, 1 Timothy 2, that we pray for our leaders. We pray for those in government. And I would say this, if you've been a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu, pray for him. He needs prayer right now. He, like I said, he could, the one thing that nobody was talking about yesterday is that he's in the midst of a trial. Pray for him and his family. They, I don't know what's going to happen with them in the next 6 months. I don't expect him. I'm not prophesying, but I don't expect him to return. I expect that the Likud will move on to a new leader. He did say today, he had a meeting with all the opposition. He says, there can be no discord. We must, one voice. There can be no fighting, which is another way of saying nobody needs to replace me. I don't want anybody in my party trying to run against me, but there will be in the near future Likud primaries. And there's two people he has to worry about. One is the Nir Barkat, the very former, I should say, but well-loved mayor of Jerusalem. He is definitely going to make a run at Netanyahu, and he may have a chance. But the guy who has seen that he really could replace him is Yossi Cohen, who is just resigned as the director of the Mossad. And he just gave a tell-all interview, which was shocking, where he revealed how they got all this information about Iran's nuclear program. And he is a friend of Bibi's. But he's also very popular in Likud. So if he joins the Likud party, he could very easily be the next leader. It will be one of the three of them, Bibi, Yossi Cohen, or Nir Barkat, the former mayor of Jerusalem. But getting back to how you can pray for Israel, pray for our leaders, pray blessing for them, pray wisdom on them, pray that our government lasts. If one person resigns, it'll fall apart. And sadly, Netanyahu and the religious leaders are working towards that. In fact, I mentioned Yaakov Litzman earlier, just to help you understand how the Orthodox, and when I say Orthodox, I mean the ultra-Orthodox. There are many, many Orthodox I get along with that are wonderful, that are good citizens of Israel. I'm talking about extreme cult-like behavior. And I consider him to be part of that. Again, he protected a woman accused of being a pedophile in Australia. He said today, when he had to turn his ministry over to someone, he said, this is a quote he gave, and I'm paraphrasing, every curse in the Torah is valid for this government.
Wow.
Like it seemed to me he was encouraging Orthodox Jews to speak curses over the government because they're that evil.
Wow.
That is so wrong. That is so wrong for a religious person, for someone who claims to represent Yahweh. So if you don't understand why I'm happy, that's one of the big reasons why I'm very happy today that the Orthodox are no longer, they have crippled our government. They've done so much damage, and they're out of the government. Now, what could happen if Likud does go to new leadership? Maybe they'll enter into this government. Maybe they'll expand the coalition. We'll have to see. I think that would be good. I'm not anti-Likud. I've been very pro-Likud my entire time being here, until I saw it turn into a personality cult over the past 4 years or so. So that's kind of it. Crazy 24 hours here in Israel, such as I have never. My wife's in Ashkelon with her mom, and you can pray for her mom. Pray for Ilana's mom. She's 82 years old, not in great health, but we're texting yesterday, and we're like, what? Can you believe this? We were just stunned. So here's some good news. So should we share some good news? One of our
sure, go ahead.
We've been raising a lot of money for bomb shelters here in Israel, and we just delivered our first one, thanks to my dear friend Scott Volk and Together for Israel. We were able to raise $12,000 and provide a bomb shelter for a family that did not have one, that lives very close to the Gaza border, and it was delivered yesterday. If you go to the Ron Cantor Facebook page, either my personal page or the public, whatever you call it, page, you can see the video of the crane picking the thing up and putting it down, and so that was pretty exciting. The
that's
family
awesome.
Was so grateful.
That's awesome. That's really great. And the campaign for renovating the bomb shelters in Ashkelon, how's that going?
It's going great. We met the initial 30,000 matching funds campaign.
Wonderful.
And then the donor, which is Pastor Troy Brewer and the Open Door Church in Burleson, Texas, they doubled the matching fund. So now it's 60,000.
Wow.
So now we're going to raise 30 more. We're going to have 120,000 to provide bomb shelters, renovate bomb shelters, provide humanitarian aid. We are standing with the people in Ashkelon in the south of Israel who live very close to Hamas-controlled Gaza. In addition to that, we sent $10,000 to a group of doctors working in Gaza to treat victims of the war. These are our enemies that got attacked. And when I say enemies, I mean they're in the Hamas-controlled territory. I don't know what individual citizens of Gaza think about their leadership in Hamas, but we wanted to help those who were injured, and so we sent $10,000. Yeshua said, it is more blessed to give than to receive, and it really is. We want to stand with our enemies, and we're going to stand with those on our southern border in Ashkelon. People want to give, they can go to roncan.net/protect. roncan.net/protect. And we're giving those, funds are going all of them are going to Ashkelon and the area down there in the south to protect them.
That's awesome. Really, that is great. I love that whole endeavor. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Ron, for this special edition of the podcast and that analysis. Help us all to understand better what happened yesterday and as the new government moves forward. And be sure to tune in, everyone, later this week when we'll have a few more days of news, and who knows what all will have happened by Friday for our regular podcast time. Be sure to follow the Israel Insider on Facebook and sign up for our daily emails where you'll get even more news and insight. Thanks again for joining us for this special edition, and we'll see you actually at the end of the week.